I only said it to be funny. It wasn't even real, obviously. People joke about that kind of stuff all the time. I was trying to sound confident, like I'm not ashamed of my past. And anyway, he always said he liked how bold I was. Until suddenly he didn't. I wasn't trying to offend anyone. It was just a harmless comment. If he was so uncomfortable, he could have said something privately. Instead, he made a scene like I committed a crime. The dinner party had been going so well until that moment. Tyler's family had invited me to his grandmother's house for her 80th birthday celebration, and I'd been nervous about making a good impression. His parents were successful lawyers, his sister was a doctor, and everyone seemed so polished and accomplished. I wanted them to see me as someone worthy of their golden boy son. The dining room was elegant in that old money way that made me hyper-aware of my discount dress and drugstore jewelry. But the wine was flowing, everyone was laughing, and I was starting to feel like I belonged in their world of inherited china and weekend houses in the Hamptons. The conversation had turned to dating stories, with Tyler's cousin sharing some hilarious tale about a disastrous Tinder date. His grandmother was surprisingly progressive, laughing about how different dating was now compared to her generation. Everyone was being open and funny about their romantic histories. That's when Tyler's friend Marcus made some joke about how wild college had been for everyone. He said something about how he'd definitely played the field before settling down with his fiancée. Everyone laughed and nodded, sharing their own stories about youthful adventures and romantic mistakes. I felt like this was my moment to contribute something memorable to the conversation. I wanted to show them that I was confident and sex-positive, not some prudish girl who would judge their family's relaxed attitude about relationships. I thought I was being bold and modern. So, when there was a natural pause in the conversation, I raised my wine glass and announced loud enough for the whole table to hear that they should count themselves lucky to have such tame stories. I said with a laugh that I'd lost count after 100, and that life was too short to keep track of every romantic encounter. The silence that followed was immediate and deafening. Tyler's grandmother stopped mid-sip of her wine. His mother actually choked on her food and started coughing. His sister put down her fork and just stared at me. Even the family dog seemed to sense the tension and stopped begging for scraps. I looked around the table, realizing that what I'd thought would be a confident, sex-positive statement had landed very differently than I'd intended. But I doubled down, laughing nervously and saying that honesty was the best policy, right? I said I believed in owning my past instead of being ashamed of it. Tyler's face had gone completely blank. Not angry, not embarrassed, just eerily calm in a way that should have warned me that something terrible was about to happen. But I was too focused on trying to salvage the conversation to pay attention to the warning signs. I tried to lighten the mood by making another joke about how, at least I'd never have to wonder if I was settling for the wrong person. I said I had enough experience to know quality when I found it, looking at Tyler with what I thought was a meaningful smile. But Tyler didn't smile back. He just sat there with that same blank expression while his family tried to restart the conversation around my announcement. His grandmother asked someone to pass the rolls, and his mother started talking about the weather, but everyone was clearly uncomfortable. Looking back now, I should have apologized immediately and tried to explain that I'd been exaggerating for effect. But in the moment, I felt defensive about their judgment and determined to stand by my statement. I believed I was being unfairly shamed for something that shouldn't matter in modern society. I'd spent months reading articles about sex positivity and female empowerment, convincing myself that I should never feel ashamed of my romantic history. I'd internalized the message that women deserved the same sexual freedom that men took for granted, and I wasn't going to back down just because Tyler's family was more conservative than I'd expected. The truth was, the number I'd thrown out wasn't even accurate. I'd been exaggerating wildly because I thought it sounded confident and experienced. My actual body count was maybe a quarter of what I'd claimed, but I'd gotten caught up in the moment and wanted to make an impression. But the specific number didn't matter as much as the principle. I believed that Tyler should love me regardless of my past, and that his family should respect my honesty instead of judging me for being open about my experiences. I thought their shock revealed their own hang-ups and double standards. During the rest of dinner, I noticed people stealing glances at me when they thought I wasn't looking. Tyler's father kept clearing his throat uncomfortably, and his mother seemed to be going out of her way to avoid making eye contact with me. The festive atmosphere had completely evaporated. Tyler himself remained strangely quiet through the rest of the meal. He answered questions when spoken to directly, but he didn't participate in the conversation, and he definitely didn't try to defend me or change the subject. I interpreted his silence as embarrassment about his family's judgmental reaction. I tried to engage his grandmother in conversation about her own youth, thinking that connecting with the guest of honor might help repair the damage I'd done. But she gave me polite but distant responses, clearly wanting to end our interaction as quickly as possible. When dessert arrived, I thought the worst was over. People were talking again, albeit more quietly than before, and I was starting to hope that my announcement would just become an awkward memory that everyone would eventually forget. I was already planning how I'd explain to Tyler later that I'd been nervous and trying too hard to fit in, but Tyler had been planning something else entirely. As his grandmother's birthday cake was being served, he stood up and tapped his wine glass to get everyone's attention. I thought he was going to make a toast to his grandmother, maybe use the moment to smooth over the tension from my earlier comment. Instead, Tyler looked directly at me with the coldest expression I'd ever seen from him. His voice was calm and clear when he spoke, making sure everyone at the table could hear every word. He said that since we were all being so honest about our pasts, maybe I'd like to tell them about the time I'd slept with his brother Jake 2 years ago. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Tyler's mother gasped audibly, his sister dropped her fork with a clatter, and his grandmother actually put her hand over her heart like she was having chest pains. The silence that followed was somehow even worse than the one after my original announcement. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what Tyler had just done. He'd taken my moment of poor judgment and used it as an opportunity to reveal the one secret I'd begged him never to share with anyone. The secret that had almost ended our relationship when I'd finally confessed it to him 6 months ago. Jake had been at the party earlier, but had left before dinner to go to work. I'd been relieved not to have to face him across the dining room table, but now I realized that Tyler had been planning this revelation all along. He'd waited for the perfect moment to destroy both my reputation and my relationship in front of his entire family. The aftermath of Tyler's announcement was like watching a car accident in slow motion. I could see the shock and disgust spreading across every face at the table, but I felt powerless to stop what was happening or defend myself in any meaningful way. Tyler's mother was the first to speak, asking in a strangled voice if what Tyler had said was true. I opened my mouth to try to explain the context, to tell them that it had happened before Tyler and I were serious, but no words came out. I just sat there like a deer in headlights while my entire world collapsed around me. Tyler's sister Sarah looked back and forth between Tyler and me, clearly trying to process the implications of what she'd just heard. She asked Tyler when this had happened and why he'd never mentioned it before. Her voice was sharp with accusation, but I couldn't tell if she was angry at me or at Tyler for keeping the secret. Tyler's grandmother set down her cake fork and announced that she wasn't feeling well, that perhaps it was time for everyone to go home. The disappointment in her voice was unmistakable, and I knew that her 80th birthday celebration was now forever tainted by my presence and Tyler's revelation. I finally found my voice and tried to explain that what Tyler had said was true, but that it had happened before he and I were in a committed relationship. I said that Jake and I had been drunk at a party, and that it had been a mistake that we'd both regretted immediately. But my words sounded hollow and defensive even to me. Tyler's father stood up and began clearing dishes with sharp, angry movements. He said he thought it was time for everyone to leave, and that perhaps Tyler and I needed to work out our personal issues in private. The dismissal was clear, and I felt like I was being ejected from their family as decisively as Tyler was ejecting me from his life. Tyler himself remained seated, watching the chaos he'd created with what looked like satisfaction. When I turned to him and asked why he'd done this, why he'd humiliated me in front of his family, he said that I'd started the honesty party and he'd just decided to participate. His calm cruelty was more devastating than anger would have been. This wasn't a moment of heated emotion or hurt feelings. This was calculated revenge for my poor judgment at dinner. He'd used the most painful secret of my life as a weapon to destroy me publicly. I tried to appeal to his grandmother, to apologize for ruining her birthday celebration, but she just patted my hand sadly and said that perhaps it was best if I left. The kindness in her gesture somehow made everything worse, because I could see that she felt sorry for me while also wanting me gone. Tyler stood up and announced that he was going for a walk, that he needed some air after such an enlightening evening. He walked out of the dining room without looking back, leaving me alone with his family, who now knew the worst thing about me and would forever associate me with their ruined celebration. I gathered my purse and jacket with shaking hands, mumbling apologies to everyone who would listen. Tyler's mother said stiffly that she hoped I would find my way home safely, but her tone made it clear that she hoped I would never darken their doorway again. The drive home was a blur of tears and humiliation. I kept replaying the evening, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong and how I could have been so spectacularly stupid. My phone was buzzing with text messages, but I was too devastated to look at them. When I finally got back to my apartment, I found 17 missed calls from Tyler and a series of increasingly angry text messages. But instead of apologies or explanations, his messages were full of accusations about my character and my fitness as a partner. He said I'd embarrassed him and his family beyond repair. The final message was brief and brutal. "We're done. Don't contact me again." That was it. 2 years of relationship ended with the text message sent while I was driving home from the dinner party, where he'd destroyed my reputation and my future with his family. The next morning, I woke up to discover that my humiliation had spread far beyond Tyler's dining room. Apparently, someone at the dinner party had shared the story, and it was making its way through our social circle like wildfire. My phone was full of notifications from people I barely knew, all eager to hear more details about the scandal. I tried calling Tyler to explain my side of the story and beg him to help contain the damage, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He'd clearly blocked my number, cutting off any possibility of communication or reconciliation. The finality of it was almost as devastating as the public humiliation. My first instinct was to control the narrative through social media. I posted a carefully worded Instagram story about how I believed in honesty and wasn't ashamed of my past, and how real love should be able to overcome judgment and insecurity. I said I was proud to be a woman who owned her sexuality instead of apologizing for it, but the response was overwhelmingly negative. Instead of support for my sex-positive stance, I got comments calling me desperate and attention-seeking. People said I'd been inappropriate and disrespectful to Tyler's family, especially his elderly grandmother. The feminist empowerment angle I'd been going for completely backfired. The story had also reached my co-workers, which created an entirely new level of professional embarrassment. My boss called me into her office to ask if there was anything I needed to discuss about my personal life affecting my work. The conversation was humiliating and made me realize how far the gossip had spread. My roommate Jessica came home that evening with a serious expression and asked if we could talk. She said she'd been hearing stories about what had happened at Tyler's family dinner, and that several people had asked her if she was comfortable living with someone who had such poor judgment and boundary issues. Jessica said she didn't want to judge my personal choices, but that she was worried about guilt by association affecting her own reputation. She suggested that maybe I should think about finding somewhere else to live until the scandal died down. The rejection from someone I'd considered a friend was devastating. I tried reaching out to other friends for support, but most of them were either avoiding me entirely or offering the kind of fake sympathy that made it clear they were judging me harshly. The few people who did respond seemed more interested in getting gossip details than providing genuine comfort. Tyler's brother Jake finally called me, but instead of offering support or understanding, he was angry about being dragged into the drama. He said Tyler had no right to expose what had happened between us, but that my behavior at the dinner party had been inappropriate and embarrassing for everyone involved. Jake said he was getting questions from mutual friends about our past relationship, and that he didn't appreciate being part of my public scandal. He asked me not to contact him again, and to keep his name out of any future drama I might create. Even the person who shared the secret I'd been humiliated for wanted nothing to do with me. The worst part was watching Tyler move on with apparent ease. His social media showed him going out with friends, attending work events, and generally living his life as if our 2-year relationship had never happened. He looked happy and relieved, like he'd finally freed himself from something that had been weighing him down. I kept checking his accounts obsessively, looking for any sign that he missed me or regretted how things had ended. But there was nothing. No sad posts, no cryptic messages, no indication that he was suffering at all from our breakup. I'd been completely erased from his life. 2 weeks after the dinner party disaster, I was forced to move out of my shared apartment when Jessica made it clear that my continued presence was affecting her social life and professional reputation. She'd found a replacement roommate and gave me 30 days' notice, which was legal but devastating to my already fragile emotional state. Finding a new place on short notice was nearly impossible, especially since my credit wasn't great, and I couldn't provide references from recent roommates who actually wanted to recommend me. I ended up in a studio apartment in a sketchy neighborhood, paying more rent than I could afford for a space that smelled like cigarettes and had neighbors who played music until 3 in the morning. My work performance had also started to suffer as I struggled to focus on anything besides my ruined reputation and destroyed relationship. I was making careless mistakes and missing deadlines, which led to another uncomfortable conversation with my boss about my recent personal issues affecting my professional responsibilities. The social isolation was becoming unbearable. I'd been effectively excommunicated from our entire friend group, not because people had officially chosen sides, but because including me in social events had become too awkward and drama-filled. I spent most weekends alone, scrolling through social media and watching other people live the life I'd been excluded from. My family hadn't been spared from the gossip either. My mother called to ask if the stories she'd been hearing were true, and whether I'd really announced my sexual history to a table full of strangers at Tyler's grandmother's birthday party. The disappointment in her voice was harder to bear than any of the social media comments. I tried dating again, thinking that finding someone new would help me move on and rebuild my confidence. But the few dates I managed to arrange invariably ended badly when the men either already knew about my scandal or quickly discovered it through mutual connections. My reputation preceded me everywhere I went. The dating apps were even worse. I'd match with someone, start talking, and then suddenly they'd become crude and inappropriate, clearly assuming that my alleged sexual history meant I was available for casual hookups. The respect and consideration I'd once taken for granted had completely evaporated. 3 months after the dinner party, I saw Tyler's first social media post featuring a new girlfriend. She was everything I wasn't: conservative, soft-spoken, and clearly from the same social background as his family. They were at some charity event together, looking like the perfect couple that Tyler's parents had probably always wanted him to find. The new girlfriend's Instagram was full of the kind of wholesome content that would never cause scandal or embarrassment: baking photos, book club meetings, volunteering at animal shelters. She was the anti-me in every possible way, and seeing them together made me realize how completely I'd been replaced. I spent that night drinking wine alone in my studio apartment, scrolling through their photos and hating myself for caring so much about someone who'd moved on so easily. I kept thinking about the confident woman I'd thought I was being at that dinner party, and how spectacularly that confidence had backfired. My phone was still buzzing with notifications, but now they were mostly from strangers who'd found my social media through the gossip network. Some were trolls making cruel jokes about my alleged sexual history. Others were men assuming I was interested in casual encounters. The attention I'd once craved had become a nightmare I couldn't escape. I deleted most of my social media accounts, but the damage was already done. The internet never forgets, and screenshots of my posts had been shared and reshared beyond my ability to control. I'd become a cautionary tale, a meme, a punchline in other people's conversations about women who didn't know how to behave appropriately. I'd managed to make one genuine friend, a co-worker named Maria, who was new to the city and didn't know anyone in my former social circle. Our friendship was built on shared interests rather than shared history, which felt both refreshing and fragile. I lived in constant fear that she'd eventually hear my story and decide I wasn't worth the association. The confidence I'd once felt about challenging social norms and speaking my truth had been completely shattered by the real-world consequences of poor timing and worse judgment. I'd learned that being right in principle didn't protect you from being wrong in practice. The woman who'd raised her wine glass and announced her sexual history to a table full of strangers seemed like someone I'd read about rather than someone I'd been. The gap between who I'd thought I was and who I'd actually revealed myself to be had never fully closed. Now I lived carefully, quietly, avoiding any behavior that might call attention to myself or create new opportunities for judgment and exclusion. The spontaneity and boldness I'd once prized had been replaced by hypervigilance and social anxiety that colored every interaction.